Hello everyone and welcome to BrickCats. My channel is for anyone who enjoys custom LEGO creations, likes saving money, and or those looking to get into custom building. If you're a fan of my channel or are interested in supporting what I do, please consider liking this review, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Each like, subscription, and comment helps others find my channel, and I greatly appreciate your support. Today I'm reviewing AceMOCs minifigure scale TIE Whisper distributed by BrickVault. If you're interested in building this or any other BrickVault model, you can take 15% off the cost of your order by using my discount code CATS15. I do receive a small amount of compensation when you use my code, and this is an amazing way to support the channel while taking the bite out of the price of the instructions. Without any substitutions, I was getting 5 stores and $126 without shipping and tax, or about $165 with shipping and tax. In my reviews, I offer my opinions on aesthetics and model features, the parts issues you might want to look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and I close out with my overall impression and pricing information in the conclusion. If you're watching this review, I assume you bought the instructions or are interested in buying them. I also assume a basic level of familiarity with Bricklink's ordering system and LEGO nomenclature. I only use genuine LEGO bricks and I always purchase the instructions. I create these reviews for my own personal enjoyment and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. AceMOCs TIE Whisper measures just over 17.5 inches long, 7.25 inches wide, and 9 inches tall on the display stand, and just under 5 inches tall off the display stand. Starting with the cockpit ball, the red striped constructions around the cockpit are recreated very nicely with red curved slopes, and the angles are created by mounting these sub-assemblies on hinge plates. The chin cannons are represented with binocular pieces, and the designer has mounted the underside cannons on the stand to allow a stable connection point, which is a great move. The cockpit is a tight fit, but does fit a minifigure inside without much difficulty. To get into the cockpit, you do have to remove these two small assemblies here. And unfortunately I can't find my Kylo Ren, so might as well have Rey piloting in here. There's no access to the cockpit from the top, and there's the printed dish from the First Order Special Forces TIE Fighter, which I think looks really good here. Moving to the back, I think this area looks pretty good, and while the engine modules make the rear of the model a little chubbier than the front, this is indeed canon accurate. To my knowledge, there's no official canon cutaway drawing for the TIE Whisperer, but it's pretty clear from Rise of Skywalker that the rear of the fighter does have some kind of window or viewport, and this leads me to believe that this is indeed a two-seat fighter, thus the rear would probably be a good candidate for the dish used in the 75101 official set I mentioned earlier. However, most TIE Whisper MOCs I've seen skip this, and this is probably due to structural reasons, and just because it doesn't really show up that well in the movie. Moving to the wing pylons, I love the small little gap on all 4 sides. Again, a canon detail that is totally unnecessary to include, but great that it's there. The wings are brick built and appropriately long and sleek. When I first looked at this model, I thought the gap between the black edge of the wings and the gray would bother me, but you don't see this from most angles, and in my opinion they look very good. The wing armament is also included. This thing seriously feels like a 5-year-old just added on as many guns as they could, but the cannons are present on the tips of the wings and in the wing gap as well. The middle section of the wing is nicely detailed on both sides with some shaping. The middle section of the wing is nicely detailed on both sides with some shaping created by wedges and ingots. The angles of the wings are created with hinge bricks, and this is nice as there's no gap to fill in where the vertex of that angle is. And the angle of the wings is held on both at the top and bottom with this little clip and bar assembly on the inside here. The display stand looks good, is well constructed, and is fairly large. The fighter sits at a slight upward angle. This is a fairly heavy model and a bit hard to balance due to the weight distribution, but the stand does the job just fine. I mentioned earlier that the underside cannons were actually built into the stand, and that's to accommodate a studded connection to keep the fighter in place very securely. And to show you how it connects, if you build it to go on the stand, there are 6 studs here that just match up to the anti-studs on the stand. And it is a very simple connection to make. Overall, AceMOCs TIE Whisper is a great looking model. It has accurate proportions, and the designer has done an excellent job rendering the details of this fighter faithfully to what little reference material is available. AceMOCs TIE Whisper requires 170 elements and 1,326 pieces for the fighter and the stand. The stand has a separate parts list and instruction set included with your purchase. Depending on when you bought the instructions for this model, the parts list provided by BrickVault may throw some errors immediately when uploading to Bricklink. I provided an updated parts list to Bricklink, but you should use Find and Replace to make the following changes in the fighter and the stand parts lists. This model does not use any extremely rare or expensive parts, and thus is fairly inexpensive for a large mock, and this is awesome for builders. As a result, there are really no obvious substitutions, but there are a couple of alternatives you could think about. The first is the cockpit windscreen. The one specified is the Dish 6x6 inverted with bar handle and Star Wars 8-spoke radial cockpit pattern, part 18675 PB02. This is the most common TIE cockpit windscreen these days, but basically any of the 6x6 cockpit windscreen elements will work, including 18675 PB23, that's the windscreen that came with the Mandalorian Fang vs TIE Interceptors in set 75348. The stand calls for 7 Technic Pin 3L with friction ridges in black, part 6558. 2 of these are visible in the stand, but are nearly impossible to see when the fighter is connected, so I recommend substituting these for the more common blue. Also in the stand, the Technic Axle 3L isn't very common in black, so I recommend changing this to light bluish gray. The only one visible is right at the bottom here, and if this bothers you, you could cover it up with a 1x1 spacer in black, part 18654. I usually don't recommend adding less common pieces, but I wanted to at least mention that the official First Order TIE Fighter set had element 14769 PB125, that's the tile round 2x2 with bottom stud holder with Star Wars hexagon with circles pattern sticker, and this is fairly available and reasonably inexpensive. This was kinda nice for adding a little bit more detail to an otherwise fairly plain looking section of the wing right here. You'll maximize your savings buying the required elements from LEGO's Pick-A-Brick service. Pick-A-Brick orders over $35 ship for free, and if you spend more than $14 in the bestseller or standard categories, the $7 handling fees are waived. I use the Brick Hunter extension to check the entire parts list against the Pick-A-Brick inventory, and I'll go over those results in the conclusion. I also have a referral link to Pick-A-Brick for which I give a small portion of the proceeds. As always, I greatly appreciate it if you use it, and thank you for supporting the channel. The TIE Whisper instructions contain 222 steps, with each part or subassembly you add in each step outlined in dark blue against a white background. This is fine for visibility, and I didn't have any trouble telling which pieces were being used. I didn't have any problems following the instructions, but I do think there could be some quality of life improvements. Certain steps have you adding lots of elements, but others have you adding very few, so evening out the pacing would be nice. Other steps, like the subassemblies that start in step 51, have you building 2 mirror image subassemblies at the same time, which is a little difficult to keep track of, and the viewing angles are not optimal as a result. For example, the steps immediately following were a little bit confusing to me. This issue of building mirrored subassemblies is pretty common in these instructions. The red cockpit details are all built concurrently like this, and the larger the subassembly gets, the more tedious it is to build and keep track of 2 at the same time. This can also mean that certain instruction steps are very zoomed out, and this can be a problem when trying to line pieces up, because you either have to zoom in on the PDF or lean closer to the screen to see. Starting with step 177, the steps to build the wing do have a ×2 marking, which is a big time saver, but it's definitely an unconventional choice to add bricks underneath bricks from the previous step. The practical effect here is that you're continually lifting the subassembly off the table to add the pieces in the next step, when normally I think you want to build the bottom layer and go up. And it's just more natural to push down on the brick to connect it than to push up when you don't otherwise have to. There are a few examples of floating pieces that don't get connected to anything for several steps, a little inconvenient especially because some of them are upside down and thus really can't be secured. There aren't too many of these though, and they're all pretty manageable. Finally, I think it would be helpful to warn the builder fairly early on, even as early as step 6 or 7 when you begin constructing the bottom of the cockpit, that this is the time to decide if you want to build it for display on the stand or not. The reason is that if you build it following the instructions, it takes a significant amount of time and effort to disassemble and subsequently remove the pieces required to mount it on the stand. I think a note stating that the 2x2 plate was stud and one of the 1x2 tiles should be left off in step 7 would do the trick. It's easy to add those on at the end if you change your mind and don't want to connect to the stand after all. The build took me about 5 hours total with pre-sorting into the major element categories beforehand. The issues I covered in this section don't make the build significantly more difficult, and I think this model is suitable for all levels of builders. I also discussed these issues with AceMOCs, and I think it's only fair to mention that this was the first model he made instructions for. From what I know of Studio, it is not the most user-friendly program, and if you'd like the final product, you certainly should not let any of the instruction issues stop you from building it. This model is very swishable, and despite its size and weight, it is very sturdy overall. The most likely issue you're going to have is with the red stripes surrounding the cockpit, and especially trying to get this off the stand here. And that's mostly because there's really only one way to hold the fighter, and that's like this. And if I could turn my... Bleh. Your fingers just tend to kind of hit these or want to grab onto them, and they are a little delicate, not too bad. They're also pretty easy to replace. The wings are very solid, and since the pylons in the middle section here are built in one continuous construction, and the angles are held in place with that studded connection, there's nearly no play at all in the wings. And this is very impressive given how much of the wing is in front of the pylon. So you can kind of see that like 75% of the wing's length, maybe not weight, this is really long, and you would expect this to kind of lever back and forth, but there's really no play at all here, so that's very impressive. Blaster cannons below the cockpit are a bit fragile, but that's not really a surprise to anyone. And even the wingtip cannons are pretty sturdy. This is a Technic connection on a bracket, so you know, I'm wiggling this pretty hard and it's not coming off, so that's pretty good. And I will say that this is in the stand configuration, obviously. The standalone configuration does have a little assembly that goes on the bottom here with the two underside cannons. And those are a little bit fragile and prone to falling off due to where you pick up the model again. And getting the fighter on the stand is much easier than getting it off, and that's a testament to how sturdy the stand connection is. I went over that a little bit earlier, but the stand is very sturdy, and there's really no reasonable chance this is going to fall off, even if it gets bumped pretty hard. And it's more likely that the entire ship and stand assembly would fall over. You can see here I just bumped one of the red cockpit assemblies. Just goes back very easily. And you just set it on the stand there, and you're good. So overall, this model gets top marks for stability, which is always great to see. AceMOCs TIE Whisperer is an incredible looking model overall, with a number of well implemented details, very solid construction, and while not many people like the sequel trilogy, myself included, I do appreciate that this part of the market isn't being ignored by talented designers. Regardless of how dumb Rise of Skywalker was, it is a pity that such a cool looking ship didn't get more meaningful screen time. Honestly, if they had just left it with that trailer, I think the ship would be much more of a fan favorite. Price-wise, this is a very affordable model as well. Without any substitutions, I was getting 5 stores and $126 without shipping and tax, or about $165 with shipping and tax. Since I didn't have any substantial substitution recommendations, I ran the numbers for full pick-a-brick, and my pick-a-brick total was $147, and this did include $7 worth of parts from pick-a-brick standard to eliminate the handling fee. You might as well get $7 worth of parts if you're going to spend the money anyway, and this did include tax but no shipping and handling. The remaining elements I was able to get, or I would be able to get from one Bricklink store, about $3 or $9 with shipping and tax, and the total was therefore $156. I think there's definitely some room for additional savings here. Since so many of the elements are very common, I probably could have done a line-by-line comparison between the Bricklink store and Pick-a-Brick, moving things out of Pick-a-Brick that were more expensive, new from LEGO, in favor of used elements. I have a feeling you could probably shave another $10 to $20 off, and it may even be worth adding back a store or two depending on the price differences between the elements. Instructions for this model cost $16.99 from BrickVault's web store. There will be a link where you can buy these in the description below, and remember you can use the discount code CATS15 for 15% off if you haven't already used it. BrickVault also runs sales fairly frequently, so keep an eye out for one of those if you're on the fence. My code does work even on sale items. Thanks as always for watching my review of AceMOCs TIE Whisperer. If you've built the model, you have something to share that I left out, or have a question about something I didn't cover, please leave your thoughts below in the comments. I'm very conscious that subscribers are earned and not deserved, so if you enjoy my content and want to see more, consider subscribing, leave the video a like or a comment, or follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. Thank you, and I hope to see you back next time.